Hi, and welcome to this flipped instructional session. This is Middle School Earth Science. Our topic today is Lesson 1.13, Soils of the Earth, and I am Mrs. Fessel. Make sure you watch this flipped lesson recording before you attend the live Class Connect session. Be sure to look for the flipped follow-up on your class schedule. So we're going to start off with what is soil? Soil is formed from four basic ingredients: weathered rock, but also water, air, and dead and living organisms. So that makes our four basic ingredients. First, tiny pieces of rock, which we're going to talk about in the lesson, are inorganic or non-living. Decayed plants and animals, which are organic or something that was once living, water, and air. And this is all from Mother Nature. First is the inorganic or non-living part of the soil. So this goes with our previous lessons from this unit about weathering. All soil starts off as rocks. Those large rocks become smaller and smaller and smaller till they're teeny tiny little pieces. Those rocks get weathered and broken down and ultimately are the beginnings of soil. So that is inorganic or non-living because rocks were never living. The second part of soil is the organic, living, or once living part of the soil. And a lot of this happens as from lichens and moss. So soil is formed from weather and rock, but it also, to be rich in nutrients, needs water, air, and those dead and living organisms. So soil formation begins or continues when organisms, such as a lichen, which is a crusty kind of algae and fungus, or moss, grow on the bare rock surfaces, as can be seen here. As those lichens and moss break down the rock, the plants need more and more nutrients, and plants with longer roots can grow. And then as these plants, lichens, and moss die, their remains mix in with the rock sediments. And these dead organisms provide a lot of the nutrients that are needed to have good, healthy soil. So the organic or living part of the soil is the dead remains, mostly of various plants, lichens, and moss. So soil is important because it's where the nutrients and water for plants are stored. If we didn't have soil, plants would have no place to put their roots. It is very important for life on Earth. And next we're going to talk about the descriptions that scientists use to classify soil based on how they are formed and what they contain. So the type of rock a soil forms from is known as the parent material, and it plays a large role in soil formation. So here's three common types of soil: sand, like you may see at the beach, silt, and clay. They're very different in how they feel, which is their texture, and the size of their grains. For example, clay feels sticky and has small grains, whereas silt has, you can see right here, has slightly larger particles and may feel more like flour. Sand is larger grains of rock particles, and as you may have experienced at the beach before, it feels gritty. So you can see the size, you can barely see the clay particle right there compared to silt, compared to sand. So scientists also use the word porosity to describe soil. So porosity is how much water a soil can hold in their empty spaces or pores. Those empty spaces are called pores between the grains. Soil with a high porosity is better at holding water. So for example, the soil down here has a high porosity because there aren't many, the particles are far apart and there's lots of water between them. So this example would be like clay. Clay is able to hold a lot of water because it has a lot of spaces between its particles. Sand, on the other hand, does not have a lot of spaces between its particles, and it doesn't hold water well. If you've ever poured water through sand, you might notice it flows through quickly because sand has a low porosity. Whereas if you took a chunk of clay and tried to pour water through it, it would hold that water and become sticky because it has a high porosity. So next we have permeability. So permeability is the rate or how fast water passes through a material. So which would you think would be more permeable, clay or sand? The answer is sand. Permeability is higher in materials with larger grains because water can flow more freely. So if you poured water through sand, it would go through quickly, versus clay, it would go through slowly. And that clay, as we talked about, holds a lot of water. So porosity and permeability work together to determine how much water can be held and for how long. Dense clay, as here in the right in the chart, has a high porosity, lots of spaces between the particles, and a low permeability, which means it holds water really well because the water gets stuck in the spaces between and flows slowly. The opposite is true of sand. It has a low porosity, not too many spaces between them, but the water is able to flow very quickly through it. And it's hard for plants to grow because the water doesn't stay. Whereas clay, it's hard for plants to grow because oftentimes it's too wet. So silt is kind of in the middle, but the problem is that it erodes easily. So that leads us to the question, what type of soil is the best for plants? And the answer to that question is loam. So loam actually has sand, silt, and clay because the combination of the three allows many different plants to grow well. The small particles of clay fill in the spaces between the sand grains. If the soil is a mixture of sand and clay, its porosity will be lower than clay, but higher than sand. So it combines together to create the perfect soil. There are large enough spaces for water and air to flow, but enough that it's not going to erode away and it's going to hold the plants in place. The soil sticks together and the plant's roots are able to grow. So this diagram is showing that in order for loam to form, the key would be to have sand, clay, and silt combining together. So different climates have different soil types. You may have noticed that a soil, even just in one part of the United States, is different than another part. So soil formation depends on what type of rock is being weathered and what type of plant and animal material is available. So for example, in wet environments, such as a jungle, there's a lot of weathering and there's a lot of decay of plants and animals. So the soil in a jungle is much richer than, for example, a soil in a desert. So this is what we started talking about. Tropical soils form in warm areas that get heavy rainfall. Weathering happens very quickly, so there is a lot of stuff for the soil to start from. Unfortunately, it also means that many nutrients get washed away because of the heavy rainfall. But the nutrients that are left are used quickly by all these plants that we see here. But as we can also see, the top layer of soil is thin because it gets used up so quickly. Grassland and forest soils are great for farming. They receive a moderate amount of rainfall, but not as much as it to wash away the nutrients, such as a tropical area. The wet environment also contributes to high levels of chemical weathering, which puts rock and nutrients in the soil. Next is desert soil. Desert soil is very dry with very little rainfall, so it is mostly the gritty, inorganic part of the soil. So not much can grow here. Then finally, our last is Arctic soil. Arctic soils receive very little rainfall. So again, similar to a desert, chemical weathering and soil formation occurs very slowly. The cold temperatures also prevent that organic matter from decaying. So this limits the amount of nutrients available and causes many Arctic soils to have permafrost, which is a layer of frozen soil that makes it even harder for plants to grow. That is all for our lesson on soil. I hope to see you in the flipped follow-up session, and please look for that live session to carry this topic into further practice. Have a great day. Thank you for watching.